Waiting. And we are live. Welcome back to another episode of the Dynasty Mind. This is episode 18, and tonight we have another great guest. You get to learn about his process. You know him on his appearance in NFL.com, but if you are like me, you follow him since his football guy days, footballguys.com days, and even maybe other ventures that Matt Harmon's been part of. So, Matt, how are you doing tonight?
Oh man, thanks for having me. I'm doing great. It's a fun time of year. I feel like so hey, when you do as like many shows, I'm gonna go right off the rails right away. As soon as you when you do like as many shows as I often end up finding myself on, I always feel like I start no matter what time of year it is. I always feel like I say, oh, it's a fun time of year. It's a fun time of year. The season is just beginning, or it's a fun time of year. Free agency is right around the corner. It's a fun time of year. We just had the NFL draft. Now we know where these players. I feel like I say that all the time, and like maybe that just goes to show, like, yeah, this thing is really fun. Like all the time, the NFL has done a great job of making sure you're always paying attention to it. It never quite goes away, even when you would like it to. But seriously, I do love this time of year with everything that's going on in the NFL calendar. But it's gonna be a fun show tonight to kind of maybe take a step back from all that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can put it in there's no better way to put it because we just came off fresh from the Super Bowl. That was like 2 Sundays ago, or maybe even one Sunday ago. And now we're already heading into the next phase. For people who are involved with the seasonal fantasy, they may not know the joys of fantasy football year round as we dynasty players do. And you bring that dynasty flavor, even in the redraft sense, in the way you present it on NFL Live, NFL.com. And I think that's one of the things that I really do enjoy your work.
Yeah, that I appreciate that. But yeah, it's just, I mean, for me, like it never stops, but I love this stuff. And like, even if this wasn't my job, I would still be like scrolling on Twitter and trying to find like, all right, well, who's going to get franchise tag, or like what's Rap Sheet reporting about Jarvis Landry or whatever. Like I'll be doing that anyways, even if it wasn't like what I got paid to do. So yeah, it never stops for me. I'm really excited just all the time about this stuff. And, I think it's just really cool to see people still engage in it all year round. Especially like working at a big media company, like pretty much nobody, the mindset in the building is like nobody cares about fantasy right now. Like, because I mean, it's the brass tacks of it, when it comes down to who's viewing content, not a lot of people are reading the fantasy articles on NFL.com right now. That's fair. That's why I try to foray into some other things so that, they'll still let me, collect a paycheck. But on Twitter and in the Dynasty community, things are like, people are hot and heavy over prospect analysis, and it's really cool to see the engagement in that.
Perfect. Yeah. So why don't you tell us a little bit about, we're going to take a step back, looking back into the 2017 season. How was that for you? What are some of the things that you've learned? And then we're going to look forward.
Man, I feel like I learned so much this season, maybe more than any other. I don't know why that is, but it just felt like a lot of lessons were learned in terms of how you got to have to be so flexible when even when, regardless of whether you play fantasy or not. And I mean, everybody listening tonight certainly does play fantasy football, but even if you're just covering the NFL, like you've got to be ready to cut on a dime. Like a good running back, you got to be ready to keep it moving and just go along with the flow of the season, because things change so quickly. I mean, just if you look at you talked about the Super Bowl, which by the way, you said was 2 weeks ago. It feels like 1,000 years ago at this point. So much has still happened since. That team is just a great example of what I felt like 2017 was all about, was just constant change. Like what you thought of the Eagles going into the season. I mean, even just let's just take the quarterback position, for example, of the Eagles. Like going into the year, I think you could tell me that you thought Carson Wentz was going to take a year 2 jump, but nobody thought he was going to be the MVP of the league. And even if you go back to the end of 2016, there were people that were openly questioning whether he was even going to be that franchise quarterback. Remember, there were stories at the end of the year about his mechanics eroding. I mean, really like Blake Bortles style stuff. So think that's how they started the year. Then by like week 5, everybody's on board with, oh, Wentz is the truth. He's the MVP of the league. And he really was. But then by the end of the season, they're holding the Lombardi trophy, and it's Nick freaking Foles holding the trophy. I mean, this stuff you couldn't even script. And to me, that was what I felt like 2017 was all about, was just learning to be really flexible with how you viewed players. And when you make those decisions and you make the right decisions when you're flexible, you can really benefit. Like if you thought that, hey, Adrian Peterson getting sent out the door, this is going to be it for Alvin Kamara. Like, and you went and, traded for him really low, or you maybe even picked him up off the waiver wire. But there were a lot of analysts out there, and I think I might have fallen into this count too, that thought, well, it really doesn't make a difference for him because they're not even playing the same role. So how is Peterson leaving going to be a big deal for Kamara? But sure enough, like, it was a huge deal, and he was a total stud running back. So making those decisions on the fly and making the right ones is really important. And I think also one other big thing, like I learned, just again, so many lessons learned, was just like, we're going to talk a lot about like talent evaluations tonight. But one thing, like when it comes to the running back position, man, I just kind of want to be like, I said this a lot on Fantasy Live podcast. Like, I just want to be like a talent agnostic when it comes to running back position. Like, because like these guys with the situation can change so drastically. And like, yeah, it's definitely one thing to be like, I believe Kareem. Let's take Kareem Hunt, for example. There are a lot of really smart analysts that I respect, like Graham Barfield, really love Kareem Hunt, JJ Zacharias, and even franchise now unfortunately used to work for with us at NFL.com. Like, those guys really like Kareem Hunt. And so you can be happy that he had this, and you could draft him based on the fact that you liked him. But man, say Spencer Ware never gets hurt, Kareem Hunt's not having this season. Like, he might have had a really good season, but he's not having the season that he had where he leads the NFL in rushing. I would say no chance. So, and Melvin Gordon's another example from a couple of years ago. I'm starting to rant a little bit, but like if Danny Woodhead didn't get hurt, like that first Melvin Gordon year where he scored all those touchdowns after a bad rookie year, Danny Woodhead doesn't get hurt that year. Like, Melvin Gordon's not having that season. There's so many examples beyond that. Just the Todd Gurley example between one year to the next and the wild swing. Talent, like the running back position, I'm almost like, who cares? Is this guy going to get the ball? And is it going to be in a situation that he fits in a good offense? Give me those players, and I'll figure out how good they are along the way.
Man, those are some great examples that you put out, because it can come to mind for both. I'll pick one example that you haven't mentioned yet, and that's Kenyan Drake. I was not a believer in Kenyan Drake. I read all the scouting reports. I listened to people that I really respect, and they've all pointed kind of like that he is not going to be a feature back, or he doesn't have the skill set to be that. But one little thing that happened once Ajayi was traded, I've turned to one of the Dolphins beat writer and ask him, weird, because I tried to figure out everything to fit into my fantasy, but he told me, don't forget about Kenyan Drake. People are mislabeling him as just a scat bag, mislabeling him as just a pass catching back. Well, I picked him up as my waiver priority. I put 60% of my FAB on him, and I was very happy with the result.
And that is such a great example, because like several dominoes had to fall for him to get into that position. You want to talk, and I agree with you. I was never a big Kenyan Drake fan, and I honestly don't know many people that were. But now he has this great end of the season, and if you look at like elusiveness rating or like some of the next gen stats that we use to measure running back creativity, man, the guy's a total stud in that. And I'm like, how soon can I overdraft him in 2018? Like, let me get there so I can just take him too early right now. I'm excited about him at this point. But again, say that these dominoes don't fall. Like, one, Jay Ajayi gets traded. And then two, like, if you remember, but when Ajayi first goes down or first gets out of town, like, Damian Williams was a big factor, like not doing anything because he's Damian Williams, but they were getting him the ball. Like, there's no way that Kenyan Drake would have had that game on Monday night against the Patriots where he has like over 20 touches, had several 20-touch games in a row, all because, Damian Williams got hurt. Like, but again, that's the way the running back position goes. Like, if you can find these situations where a guy, like, no matter what you think about his talent, and I'm sure a lot of people, myself, I could say I made that mistake, because I didn't believe in Kenyan Drake as a player. And so I missed out on picking him up in pretty much all my leagues. And he was a legit league winner down the stretch, as you mentioned. And, that's just one thing that I'm like, for running backs, especially, I'm almost like, who cares what I think? Because I don't know anything. So who cares? like, I know that this guy's about to get the ball on Sunday, and I'm just going to follow that, as opposed to like what I think about how good he is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the lessons that we can take with us is to be flexible and not to hold on to preconceived notions or older information. Things change and we have to adapt to it. So with that said, let's head into looking forward into 2018. Our viewers, our people here want to learn about your process, want to delve into your Dynasty Mind. Tell us a little bit about the importance of having a process and how what does your process look like right now?
Sure, I think having a process with anything is important. I mean, because if you don't know how you got there, you don't know how you're going to get there again. So if you have a good fantasy season and you don't know by what way you got there, and I'm talking like not saying like I had a good fantasy season because I drafted Alvin Kamara late. But why did you have to then ask yourself, like, that's great, but why did you draft Alvin Kamara? Did you draft him because you believe that pass catching running backs are the key to building your fantasy team? Did you draft him because he plays in a good offense? Okay, like those are legitimate ways to build a process. Like these are the type of players I target. So then going into the years following, you can then relook at that and decide how to fit around new players coming into those situations. So that's one thing that I think is important. Just the reason you want to have a process is so that you can make it repeatable. You mentioned being flexible. That's key when it comes to process, like not just in individual player evaluations, but again, just how you do things in general, because sometimes that what looks like a square peg is not really a square peg, and you're going to try to fit it into the square peg and it's not going to go in. So sometimes, and that's when it comes down to just missing player evaluations straight up. Also this time of year for me, I love having like a full season's worth of data and analytics and statistics to go back on to look again, because that's when you can really kind of figure out like, what did you miss on going into the year? Because it's one thing, you just get swept up into the season during the year and so much is going on. Like for me, one thing that I think I realized pretty early after the close of the regular season, I'm just starting to go through, all the statistics that you can possibly go through. And one thing I realized, I'm like, man, Juju Smith-Schuster, that guy had an incredible rookie year. In the moment watching it, I'm like, yeah, he's really good. And like, you just come to accept it and whatever. Then you go back and just really look like efficiency wise, what he did. I mean, when you talk about like all the next gen stats that we track for player evaluations with wide receivers, just star studded across the board. And that's something that I'm like, man, coming into the year, I didn't really think that he was all that good of a rookie receiver. He wasn't one of the guys that I was super high on. So then you start to ask yourself, okay, what did I miss there? But also that changes your opinion on the player with Juju. And that's what I like to do this time of year. Just start to put things into focus, with guys, just really understanding what kind of season they had, more so than like in the moment. It's tougher to say when you're at that point.
Absolutely. I agree with that. And it's definitely something that I had a similar experience to you when looking into players like Juju. It's easier to say, oh, he's good because you watch him on TV, you watch that amazing Sunday night catch and run, but to be able to go back and delve into, and you mentioned using statistics, analytics, metrics, and all that with the film study. So would those be characteristics of your process into player evaluation?
Yes, absolutely. I find like the whole film versus numbers war to be really boring. I find like the people that are, it's like anything. It's like people that are, I'm not going to skew into like politics or religion, but like anybody that's too much of a zealot about one thing, I tend to have a lot of skepticism towards that just in general. And it's the same thing with film and numbers, because you can't look me in the face and say that the other side doesn't have its wins. If you're a numbers person, there have been misses. If you're a film person, there has been misses, just like the other side has had their hits. So to me, I want to try to incorporate both things as much as possible. And I do believe that there are a lot of inefficiencies with film watching. I think just straight up sitting there and watching a game and like taking notes on it, I think that there's a lot of inefficiencies there, and that your brain will absolutely trick you into believing things that really human beings just aren't really good at seeing things and contextualizing them and weighing them properly. That's just proven brain science. At the same time, I believe that numbers and data are really you're going to miss things in that way. You're going to miss the human element of football. You're going to miss the way that it's just so many different variables with 11 guys out on the field. And sometimes data is not always going to tell you that story. So that I try to let them blend into each other as much as possible. I definitely prefer, when I'm watching film, to like have a numbers-based process, a checklist, a rubric, like a reception perception. With data, I always like to go back and be like, man, let me filter all of these. Like, when I'm putting out a statistic about like Dak Prescott throwing into tight windows, I'm like, let me go back and like, okay, here are all the plays he threw into a tight window. Let me go back and like watch those and see what they really were. So it's definitely a blend of both.
Excellent. I think you put it very well, and that's sort of the way that I try to blend both too, because both have merits. Now, looking into that in your process, you mentioned that the human brain can only handle so much information. So you would have to be very selective about who you listen to and who you want to bounce your ideas. So who are some of the people that you would go to kind of double check with if you are on the right track? And who are some of the people that you would consider may not share the same process, but you would pause and listen just in case, because you know that they might be onto something that you might have missed?
Yeah, almost all the guys I work with at NFL, pretty much almost everybody there, I really trust and respect the way they view things. So if they're telling me something that's different from my opinion, I like to go back and look and see what they see or what it is they're looking at that has them at this different spot, for sure. Guys like Sigmund Bloom and Matt Waldman have been people that I've followed and respected for freaking ever. I remember listening to the Audible podcast, like back when I was just a fan, like before I even decided I wanted to write about football, and be like, man, I want to think about football like these guys. I've told Matt Williamson that story, that it was his guest episode because I followed his work at ESPN, that like he tweeted out a link to the Audible podcast when he was on the couch. And that was how I discovered that show. And I remember listening to them talk about that. And this was like when I was in college on like a winter break or something, like listening to that podcast and be like, oh my God, like this is how I want to think about football. Like these guys are taking it so many deeper levels. And like, so those guys are all people that I like to bounce ideas off of and check their opinion. I really like Josh Norris's humility-based scouting kind of process, and just understanding like there's some things that, you're never going to know. And like, he always says he's like not an NFL scout. So that he doesn't take things as seriously. Daniel Jeremiah at NFL Network, I love grabbing his ear about things when he's around in the office. Like, hey, what did you see about this player? Like, we view this receiver differently. What's up with that? Like, so there's so many guys. I mean, I could sit here and rattle off names forever. Especially, I honestly like, especially film scouts that I think are better than me at watching games and really understanding things. I love to get their feedback just on what they're seeing, and seeing how it matches up with data, or seeing how it matches up with what I'm seeing. So there's so many people that I think are so good that I could sit here and rattle off so many names, but it's innumerable.
Yes, those are all fantastic names. If you have never heard of them, go on Twitter, find them. They're everywhere. I'm even surprised that Josh Norris wouldn't consider himself a scout, because I really do respect a lot of the works that he put in. And so let's put all the things together, putting your process together. Help our viewers through this off season, where values are going to fluctuate, where rookies are going to throw a wrench into what we thought we know, and help us out. How do you use your process to guide you through this tumultuous time of value fluctuations?
Well, this is definitely a great time to consume as much information as possible. Like I said, you got to not try to get the overload. So it's a little bit of a balance. But there's so many, I just listed off all those good people, and there's so many more that I could say, like, to really try to take in. You got to pay attention to the news and how things are going to change, because it's not always a one-to-one comparison. This is when you're going to hear a lot of coaching based analysis on like, hey, this coach has had this guy before, and so that means this guy could be this guy. And it's really when you have to start marrying what people are seeing from a player. I think Devontae Parker is a great example. Like, I think people have tried to shoehorn him into so many different roles, and none have really worked. For a long time, when Gase came in, people were like, oh, Adam Gase has always had very productive X receivers, whether it's Demaryius Thomas or Alshon Jeffrey. But then you look at Devontae Parker, and a lot of people that really watch him and all that, they'll say, like, he doesn't beat press very well. He's not a guy that's going to separate like those players did from man coverage. And that's typically been the case throughout his career so far. It hasn't gone as well. So I think it's about like just trying to marry all those different types of information that you could take in. I think there's just so much information to consume that's really the best way to go about it. Also, it's the offseason is still a time to be flexible, and just realize again that a lot of times before the draft, like, man, these things, like some of this conversation that we're going to talk about prospects for months and months and months, like, it doesn't really matter because, a player can go to a landing spot and it could all, mean nothing. I think a guy like Carlos Henderson is a really, like, he's somebody, by the way, it's like probably like a blast from the past name. Like, people aren't even thinking about him at this point, but I was thinking about this the other day. He's a player that right now, like, I really loved coming into the draft. I thought he was really good. He's another player that, like, DJ kind of turned me on to. Like, hey, if you checked out this kid from where did he even go? So Louisiana Tech. Like, if you checked him out, you should definitely look at him. I did. Blown away by his reception perception numbers. Just thought he was such a fun player to watch with the ball in his hands. He goes to a situation in Denver where I'm like, hey, he could compete to be the third receiver there because they don't really have anybody else. Gets hurt, misses his entire rookie season. Like, there's not a great track record of like a third round pick getting hurt and then missing his entire rookie year and coming back. But then at the same time, you can also tell yourself a story of how he comes back to a wide receiver core that maybe if Kirk Cousins is there, that they've had to jettison Demaryius Thomas or Emmanuel Sanders, or they might trade Sanders even if they don't get Cousins. So there's a lot of different ways that his career path could go. And you just got to like kind of tell yourself the best story. Bloom always says that, like, you got to tell yourself the best story. What story do you think is the most believable? And then divorce your thoughts on the player, kind of take that out of it, because it's definitely important. How a talent evaluation has its place, but at the same time, like, the NFL is very much just like it's a pattern based thing. It's like, what kind of pedigree do you have? And if you don't show something early, you can just get washed away, even if you thought that they were a good player coming into school. Because I hate to break it to everybody that hashtag grinds the film, but like, just because you thought a player's clips looked good coming out of college doesn't mean their NFL coaching staff is going to give them the ball. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, then you made a very good point with that regards. We are all, or I am, I'll take ownership of this. I was a fan of a lot of the wide receivers that still haven't panned out. We have Laquan Treadwell, who hasn't done anything. John Ross, who I was a huge fan of, and Mike Williams, who's basically missed this whole rookie season again. And we see this a lot more with wide receivers, I think, over the last few years. And maybe that's what pushes people off a little bit in trusting rookie wide receivers going forward. But it also helps that the incoming class of rookies are very, there's a lot of talented running backs. So wide receivers might, in my estimation, in the landscape looking at things, might take a back seat. But what is your thought on that?
Well, I think that everything comes down to just like the situation that they end up in. For a guy like Nelson Aguilar is a great example. I'm just trying to give like him as many context-based examples as possible, so people kind of understand like the point I'm trying to make. So I'm not just babbling, but like Nelson Aguilar is a great example of a guy who, he's pretty much left for dead coming into this year, and then they change his role and boom, he's catching 9 passes in the Super Bowl. He's catching 8 touchdowns this year. That is just the perfect example of like, sometimes things, you got to be patient. You got to wait for things to happen. His career was on that near-death experience, and it just completely shifted this year because they changed his role in the offense, and that brought him more confidence, and he needed and there's so many off-the-field things that we don't even know about. Like, a player like Laquan Treadwell is a great example. Like, maybe he's got some kind of personal problem or something that we'll never know about that. And then, analysts that didn't love Laquan Treadwell will beat their chest about how they got that right. And that's the funny thing about football and especially fantasy, even more so when you get into like the 1 game sample sizes, like you could play out this player's career to how it started, 10 times. And this was the one way that it happened here in this version of reality here in 2017. But like that could have been completely different 5, 4, other times if you tested that same exact thing. So I don't really know if that answered the question.
I think you not only answer the question, I think you give us more than just toning down on I miss on this player, I miss on that specific player, but we have to think about the way how we came to the conclusion that this player would be good, or we have to consider a lot of contextual factors that come into play that we cannot always account for when looking at how they come into the league.
Yeah, and I think too, also with to get more into the wide receiver thing specifically, I think that with the spread, like this is a pretty common thing right now with the spread offense. Like I think a lot of people are realizing that it's a big transition to come from the NFL, and I've been tracking this for several years now. Like these receivers that only line up on one side of the field, those guys have had in college like 75% or more of their snaps. I've tweeted the chart out. I'll probably revisit it again once I get through this draft class. Like guys that spend only one time, like they only run routes from one side of the field. There's a lot of busts from that group. Kevin White, Dorial Green Beckham, Laquan Treadwell, who you just mentioned, Corey Coleman. Not that some of those guys can't turn their careers around, but right now they've had really slow starts to their NFL career. And I think that that's kind of something to keep track of, because when you're running routes, like having to do all that you have to do to earn separation, it's one thing to do it from one side, from just like everything. I'm timing all my breaks. I'm setting up all my muscle memory to break on routes on the right side of the field, to then flip that over and have to go back and forth in game. Cause no NFL receiver is spending 75% of their snaps on one side of the field. It just doesn't happen. Offenses don't run that way. So you got to switch everything up that you are used to doing. That's something that I'm paying attention to, because a lot more colleges are doing that. They've realized that they can just efficiently, the way college offenses are set up, even the way the field is structured is different. The way their defenses are operating, like they can spread you out and attack you that way. And because college is like, it's the farm system for the NFL, but it's not a minor league. They're trying to win games. You're not trying to preparing these guys for the NFL is one thing, but also like these college coaches need to keep winning games so that they cash these outrageous big fat contracts. So it's all part of it. And that's something that I'm paying attention to more, so that like, I know DJ and Bucky made a great point about this on one of the Move the Sticks podcasts, Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks. Like they were talking about these spread offenses, and I think it was DJ made the point of like, when you're coming out from an offense like Baylor, you could be the first round pick or you could be the 6th round pick, and you have the same learning curve. You both have to learn the completely same things. So the 6th round pick, if he just picks it up faster mentally, he's going to get on the field, as opposed to the 1st round pick who hasn't picked it up mentally, even if he's more physically gifted. So that's something that I'm just watching to going forward with the wide receiver position.
Wow, you just blew my mind with that aspect you're looking into, and I'm going to really look forward to knowing what you find about receivers who lined up predominantly in one side of the field. So thank you for that information. We're going to head into a section which I would call the Rorschach Inkblot test. Basically, what I would consider people to give out their quick information, quick thoughts about a player without putting too much analysis or overthinking themselves, because I think this is a great way, in my opinion anyways, this is an untested test, but this is a great way of putting the process all together at once, and then just boom, how I view this player, how I would think about this player, and how do I value this player going forward. So my first player to you, just throwing it out there, is Amari Cooper.
Man, when I saw this on the rundown, I was like, when you called the section the Rorschach test, or the Rorschach test and the Inkblot test, I'm like, man, what a perfect player for this, because like you can look at Amari Cooper's career and see whatever you want to see out of it. I mean, if I have to sit here and like take a stance on his career, I think it stabilizes. But it never reaches the heights that maybe, some especially dynasty fantasy players, loved Amari Cooper. And maybe they still do, because of his youth, because of his production, because of his age. And like, that's all real stuff. to me, I always kind of saw him, even coming into his league. If you go back and look at my reception perception from on Football Guys coming out of from when he was coming out of school, I always thought he was going to kind of be like a really solid 1B sort of player. I thought he was going to struggle in contested situations. I thought his hands were suspect, and those things have turned out to be true. And I always thought he could be like maybe never be like an AJ Green type of player, but like a Reggie Wayne type of player. Reggie Wayne's freaking, I mean, he's great. That was kind of the archetype that I saw him in. And, I think it stabilizes somewhere. I don't think he's just going to fall off the face, because this was really, I mean, it was a nightmare year no matter which way you slice it. So I think that if I'm looking at the Inkblot, I think it's gonna stabilize out as like a pretty good 1B type of receiver, but probably never going to reach the heights that we once thought.
That's an interesting way of putting it, and it definitely will affect how the way you want to acquire him or draft him, and your expectations going forward. And I'm really glad that you know what the Inkblot test is about.
Yes, I imagine you probably have a few people like that you send that to and like, what the hell is he talking about?
Fortunately, I had before you that had two bright minds who have been involved in the academic world and especially in the psychology world. Both John Lobb, Gridiron Scholar from Football Die Hard, and Matt Waldman.
Oh yeah, Waldman definitely knows.
Yes. Okay, so my second player to you, D.D. Westbrook.
Great one too, because he's one of those. What kind of story do you want to tell yourself? Jacksonville obviously has two big dominoes coming into free agency. I mean, one, the greatest domino ever, as Allen Robinson. What is he going to return? If he doesn't return, it opens up things a lot in the passing game. Marquise Lee, obviously, I think he's probably going to be gone. The interesting thing, though, with Jacksonville is that Keelan Cole and D.D. Westbrook were both rookies last year. Cole ended up leading, I think, all rookie receivers in receiving yards. He at least led Jacksonville in receiving yards, which is pretty crazy. I really like Keelan Cole, and I think if I was to put a chip on those two players right now, I think I would put it on Cole over Westbrook. So he's like, his Inkblot is kind of bleeding over into the other one. You know what I mean? So into DD's, and I think that I think at times like Westbrook, he seemed like a player that people really wanted to make happen. And that's another thing too. Like with this Inkblot test is a great example, because oftentimes you see what you want to see. And I think with a lot of people looking at the Inkblot at the end of the year, really kept trying to want to make D happen. And he did. At some points he offered some pretty decent games. But others he completely disappeared in. So for me, if I'm placing a chip on one of these young Jacksonville receivers, if so much opportunity opens up there, I think I'm going to put it on Keelan Cole. He's somebody I really like.
Yeah, and definitely it makes sense. And we have to be flexible about this, like we mentioned in the beginning of the show, because we know more about Dede. Coming into the year, everyone scouting report you have about Dede, nobody knows anything about Keelan Cole or where he comes from. I'm sure even Sigmund Bloom was the biggest Dede Westbrook fan, if I was not mistaken. But now you see that, undrafted. I think he was undrafted, right? Yeah, Keelan Cole. Yeah, undrafted free agent coming in, doing the things that we wanted to see from Dede, but now we have to question whether Dede has that full-time role that we envisioned for him coming in, or now if maybe Jacksonville would turn to an undrafted free agent, which they're not a stranger to, because that's how we got to know Allen Hurns.
Yeah, totally. And Hurns is another guy. I mean, is he going to get cut? I would think he probably ends up getting cut. And Jacksonville too, then you're also looking at, like, if they bring back Allen Robinson, like how many of these other receivers are we really going to be all that interested in fantasy? And it comes back to that talent evaluation thing. Like maybe I think Keelan Cole is really good. Maybe somebody thinks Dede Westbrook is really good. Well, it's probably not going to matter if they're the number 2 receiver on Jacksonville. You know what I mean? They're not going to be throwing the ball all that much anyways. And then they have one big target hog there at the center of the universe in Allen Robinson. So that's just, again, like we can have these little debates with each other, but at the end of the day, does it even really matter? Right.
Very well put. So my last person to you, as much as I like to stay on the wide receiver trend, I got curious about this player myself, so I will throw it to you. What do you think of Teddy Bridgewater?
Great question. He is probably the most fascinating like second level story in the NFL this offseason, because the Vikings quarterbacks in general, they have so many different options. They have 3 guys that at some point had a lot of success for them. Sam Bradford is the one I don't think is going to be back. So he'll resign there in a few weeks. Don't worry, just because I said that. But he's the one I don't expect to be back. I think they'll make a decision on Case Keenum. I think they could chase Kirk Cousins. I think that's entirely possible. Bridgewater, to me, it feels like his best shot. And, talking again, when you're trying to think it with the psychology aspect of your brain, he even came out and said recently that 2017 was his favorite year in the NFL. Which is interesting. You'd think you weren't even playing. Like, why would this be your favorite year? Wouldn't it be one of the years that you started? But I think he's a player that really loves to be on a team that he's comfortable with. I'm sure he feels indebted to the Vikings in some way because they showed faith in him. I'm sure there's a lot of emotional aspect to their relationship right now. That's why I think almost no matter what, that he ends up back there. And for me, I really liked Teddy as a quarterback coming into the league, and I thought he showed good things at different points. For fantasy, he's a tough one because he might not be a starter this year. He might honestly never be a starter ever again because people definitely remember him, I think, in a really good light. And I like I said, I think he's a good quarterback, but he also wasn't like super productive or anything. And when it comes down to brass tacks, I think if he fades from the scene for a couple of years and is not the starter, people aren't necessarily going to remember that. So I think he'll at some point reemerge as a factor. But I think this next year, I think he's back with the Vikings and is not in a starting role, at least not to begin the year. Maybe eventually they want to get back to that. But for me, I think he's more of like a really interesting part-time character in a sitcom. Like, we don't know when we're going to see him again. He's going to pop up, no doubt about it. Like, Kramer's going to bust through that door at some point. We don't know when it's going to happen. That's sort of the way I'm viewing Teddy right now. I don't think he's going to go to like the Jets and be their starting quarterback or something like that. Like that would be a little surprising to me.
I think that's very well put, in very balanced view and expectation of Teddy going forward. So that does affect people who want to acquire him or maybe want to trade him away in I envision more super flex leagues and 2 quarterback leagues rather than 1 quarterback league. Well, Matt, thank you so much. Why don't you, for just sharing your process with us, why don't you tell us what you're up to? What are you looking forward to be producing in the upcoming days?
Yeah, so I mentioned it's a fun time of year. It really is. This is a cool time for me. I'm getting into the college receivers, so expect some reception perception results coming out of there soon. Doing a lot of work right now, just looking back at last season with our next gen stats and like some of the I've been putting out the top 10 lists. You can find all those. NFL.com/Harmon is my author page if you just want to go and look up whatever is going on there. And also really cool. I think this is the first time I'm going to announce this officially here on your show. Tomorrow I'll be on Up to the Minute on NFL Network talking about some data and everything. So for the first time in the old Harmon TV career, no fantasy, no hipsters, no bits, just takes, just football talk. So it'll be really cool. So I'm excited. That's coming up tomorrow. And hopefully, as long as I don't go in there and, throw up, they'll let me back on on more of like a weekly basis. So that's something I'm looking forward to.
Awesome. I am looking forward to that. And thank you for sharing that with us. I will make sure our viewers and all our fake pigskin fans will tune in for that show. That is
4 p.m. Eastern time. I should probably say that, right?
Yes.
4 p.m. Eastern time on NFL Network.
Awesome. And your appearance on the ATN podcast and all those, I'm sure you're very well prepared. Wow, this is amazing. Yeah, I'm looking forward to your reception perception again. It's always a very good read and shows the work that you put in, and it shows the love that you have for fantasy football. So thank you so much again, Matt, for coming on to Dynasty Mind. I've enjoyed our time, and I sure hope that you had a good time as well.
Yeah, this was awesome, man. Love the discussion. This was really cool. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you so much. And we will come back next week, guys. Just keep tuning in. I will be posting this. My Twitter handle is at FFDynasty101. And Matt, you are at MattHarmon_BYB.
Yep. Still rocking that underscore like it's like a bad tattoo. It's like, what do you want me to do? There it is.
Yeah, never change. And we'll find you guys on Twitter if you don't find us first. Thank you so much.